Dear community members of Wessex Jamaat, brothers, sisters, guests, friends, from wherever you are tuning in, I pray that you are well. Salamun alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting and welcoming you to this event by the Mahdi Health Committee, an expert's guide on how your diet can change your life. The weather is absolutely lovely today. I'm certainly glad that I've been drinking lots of fluid in the evenings, and I hope that all your fasts and your ibadat are going well in this holy month. A heads up for all our viewers that what we will be discussing today will be based on some of the latest research into health and nutrition. You may find that what you hear today is completely new to you. You may find that it overturns your own existing ideas about what foods are healthy and what foods are not. I know from listening to content from Dr. Sheppard that my views on nutrition have changed, and I'm sure that many of yours will today as well. To start off with, as is befitting, we will commence with recitation from the Holy Quran with a passage from Surah Nahl, chapter 16. This will be recited by Brother Abbas Hooda. Can we please welcome him with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum.
Assalamu alaikum, Abbas. Just to check you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm just going to recite a short passage as Muhammad Abbas mentioned from Surah Nahl. I'll be reciting from verse 3 to 11, and I will recite it along with the translation, so it'll be good for us all to get an understanding of what this verse means and how it is related to this program today. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم خلق السماوات والأرض بالحق تعالى أما يشركون. He created the heavens and the earth with the truth. Highly exalted be he above what they associate with him. خلق الإنسان من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين. He created man from a small seed, and lo, he is an open contender. وَالْأَنْعَامَ خَلَقَهَا لَكُمْ فِيهَا دِفْءٌ وَمَنَافِعُ وَمِنْهَا تَأْكُلُونَ. And he created the cattle for you. You have in them warm clothing and many advantages, and of them do you eat. وَلَكُمْ فِيهَا جَمَالٌ حِينَ تُرِيحُونَ وَحِينَ تَسْرَحُونَ. And there is beauty in them for you when you drive them back to home and when you send them forth to pasture. لَرَؤُوفُ وَتَحْمِلُ الْأَثْقَالَكُمْ إِلَى بَلَدٍ لَمْ تَكُونُوا بَالِغِيهِ إِلَّا بِشِقِّ الْأَنْفُسِ إِنَّ رَبَّكُمْ لَرَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. And they carry your heavy loads to regions which you could not reach, but with distress of the souls. Most surely your Lord is compassionate, merciful. وَالْخَيْلَ وَالْبِغَالَ وَالْحَمِيرَ لِتَرْكَبُوهَا وَزِينَةً وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And he made horses and mules and asses that you might ride upon them, and as an ornament, and he creates what you do not know. وَعَلَى اللَّهِ قَصْدُ السَّبِيلِ وَمِنْهَا جَائِرٌ وَلَوْ شَاءَ لَهَدَاكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. And upon Allah it rests to show the right way, and there are some deviating ways, and if He please, He would certainly guide you all aright. هو الذي أنزل من السماء ماء لكم منه شراب ومنه شجر فيه تسيمون. He it is who sends down water from the cloud for you. It gives drink, and by it grow the trees upon which you pasture. ينبت لكم به الزرع والزيتون والنخيل والأعناب ومن كل الثمرات إن في ذلك لآية لقوم يتفكرون. He causes to grow for you thereby herbage, and the olives, and the palm trees, and the grapes, and all of the fruits. Most surely there is a sign in this for a people who reflect. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim.
Thank you, Brother Abbas, for sharing that passage in which we hear of some of the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, including the various nutritious foods that He has blessed us with, very much in keeping with our topic for today. Following on from that, I'd like to now introduce our main speaker for this afternoon. Andrew Sheppard is a leading health scientist and clinical lead at ReadyCare. Recently awarded the American Heart Association's International Scholar Award, Andrew has spent the last 12 years working in the health and disease prevention field and has published many studies in international journals. Andrew works as a clinical lead treating patients suffering from diabetes, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure, and is one of the country's leading experts in the prevention and management of chronic conditions through lifestyle interventions. We are greatly honoured to have him with us this afternoon. I'd just like to add for the viewers, if you suffer from diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, or are overweight, or if you want to prevent these conditions in the future, then I suggest you listen closely to what Dr. Sheppard will be sharing with us today. If you do have any questions or comments at any point, please do feel free to write these in the comments section. We will be having a Q&A at the end where we will aim to answer as many of these questions as possible. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mohammed Abbas, and delighted to be here, everyone. Thanks so much for having me on board. So I'm just going to share a screen here for 2 seconds. Super. So thank you very much. Honored to be here during Ramadan and give you some, I suppose, an overview of the science. And it was a great introduction as well, and a great kind of overview, just the point that you made, Mo, because a lot of what I'll go through here today would be absolutely brand new as a concept to a lot of people. It really will. So it's fantastic to be able to bring this advice to people who don't already know. So like Mo was saying, my background is I'm the clinical research lead at ReadyCare. So this is just a quick overview of the sort of results we see in our clinical practice using the exact advice that I'm about to give you guys and go through the science of. So what I'll do is I'll break down the science and make it kind of straightforward as well. So we get a little bit technical, but also give you kind of practical tips as well. So this is a study looking at the effect of whole foods. So removing processed and refined carbohydrates in particular from your diet, not limiting calories, and eating things like meats and eggs and cheese and the sort of stuff that we've, funnily enough, been told to avoid for the last 30 or 40 years. Doing that, we've seen a 48% remission rate in type 2 diabetes, or normalized of HbA1c to be more correct. Significant reductions in blood sugar levels, weight loss of 6 kgs in 8 weeks, which is about 14 pounds or so. Triglyceride reductions and blood pressure reductions similar to mono drug therapy, so similar to what you'd see on drugs. And we published our results in the American Heart Association, European Congress of Internal Medicine, European Society of Congress, and just recently, just to give you a bit of, I suppose, just to give you a bit of confidence in what I'm talking about, because like Mo was saying, it'll be different to what you've heard before for sure. We were recently awarded the American Heart Association Paul W. White International Scholar Award for our work in primary care. So, as Mo was saying, if we look at the guidelines, we're seeing very new things in the guidelines, especially in the last, the recent kind of couple of years. We're seeing that the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, and the European Association for the Study of Diabetes have all come to the conclusion that a lower carbohydrate diet is the optimal diet for lowering your blood sugar levels. Now, that's really important because lowering your blood sugar levels for diabetes also has a knock-on effect of reducing your blood pressure, also has a knock-on effect of promoting weight loss, and also has a knock-on effect of optimizing your cholesterol. So in this kind of 30-40 minute talk, I'm going to try and tell you and explain all the mechanisms at play, why that happens, and what sort of food you should be eating more and less of. So we have the ADA, the American Diabetes Association, who for the longest time told people to eat a high-carb diet, have said that reducing an overall carbohydrate intake for individuals with diabetes has demonstrated the most evidence. So it's reversing diabetes. So this is a real breakthrough. I mean, we thought we needed carbs for energy for the longest time, and now we realize that actually reducing your overall refined carbohydrate intake and processed carb intake can have huge benefits across the full spectrum of metabolic health. And then we see statements like this in 2019 from the Australian Heart Association, and they don't put these out, softly. There's a lot of talk goes into them, but saying we've removed our restriction for healthy Australians on eating full-fat milk, cheeses, and yogurt. So no longer go for low-fat, no longer go for low-fat butters, low-fat cheeses. And they state that while the evidence was mixed, it's found that this type of dairy has a neutral effect and doesn't increase your risk of heart disease or stroke. So you'd be kind of wondering, well, if we've heard for the last 30 or 40 years that we should be eating low-fat foods, counting our calories, and eating more of the kind of whole grains and carbohydrate-based food, then where did that advice come from, and how has it suddenly taken a turn over the last couple of years? So let me tell you the story very quickly about the evolution of our dietary guidelines. It's something I've studied pretty intensely over the last few years. So in 1977, there was a hypothesis that came about behind the work of a guy called Ancel Keys, who was a physiologist going back to the 50s and 60s, and he put forward a study called the lipid heart hypothesis. And you can Google this later on. It's a really interesting story. And his story said, well, it looks like, and I say it looks like because it was never proven, it looks like the more saturated fat and cholesterol you eat, the more there's a higher prevalence of heart disease and stroke in those particular countries. Now, what Ancel neglected to say, quite deviously, was that he'd actually done the study on 22 countries, but only published the data on 6. The reason he only published the data on 6 was because it showed a correlation between increased fat intake, increased meat intake, increased cholesterol intake, and an increase in chronic disease, particularly stroke and heart disease. So it was false information from the get-go, but the American Heart Association and American Diabetes Association put pressure on the major governing bodies to change the guidelines to low fat. So again, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your ancestors were never concerned about fat or lamb or ghee butter or anything that had more fat in it. There was huge objections to this by George Mann, who was the Framingham Heart Study, a very famous study. He was the lead of that. But despite this and him disagreeing with this and many of his peers disagreeing with it, we had the introduction of all these low-fat processed foods. Now, Cholesterol magazine, or Time magazine, in 1984, it shows a cover of their magazine saying cholesterol and now the bad news. And this was the public messaging of the time. And the bad news was that it looks like, and again, I use that word carefully because it was never proven, it was a lipid heart hypothesis for a reason. It looks like cholesterol might be clogging up our arteries based on this new study, and maybe we should eat less eggs and less meat. So in 1984, we saw a huge increase in the consumption of refined carbs and seed oils. So seed oils are just kind of oils that you'd see in processed foods, vegetable oils and things like that, trans fats and so on. Refined carbs then are what you might call junk food, but it also includes breads and rices and cereals and granola bars and things like that. But we'll go into that in a bit more detail shortly. So in the following 10 years after the introduction of the low-fat guidelines in 1977, there was a huge increase in obesity. So to put it into perspective how big this increase was, in the previous 10 years, there was a 1.4% increase in obesity, which worried the government, worried all the governments around the world, only in Western countries, funnily enough. So in the following 10 years, after the implementation of the low-fat guidelines, which we absolutely adhere to when you look at the buying trends, there was a doubling in the prevalence of obesity. So it didn't go up 1.4%, it went up 11%. And that's continued at that rate of 10 or 11% over the last 3 or 4 decades. So we have this new science that's emerged on the role of cholesterol in the body, and more specifically, the idea that insulin resistance, which I'll explain in a second, is actually at the root cause of heart disease, not dietary cholesterol, not saturated fat intake. So a new theory begins to emerge, which implicated insulin resistance as the root cause of heart disease. And Time magazine actually published an article suggesting that cholesterol and fat were incorrectly demonized, and the cover says it all. The cover says, "Eat butter. Our scientists had labeled fat the enemy. This is why they were wrong." Now, at this stage in 2017, we'd seen obesity hit 40% in the States, and sadly, it's across our kids. It's higher in certain socioeconomic areas, within certain ethnicities, and so on. So another one that really turned all this sort of we should all be eating low-fat, high-carb on its head was the USDA guidelines, which they quietly released in 2018 with an update saying that we remove the suggestion to limit your dietary cholesterol intake, and it's now safe to consume unlimited amounts of eggs and foods high in cholesterol. So again, because the research was, dodgy to say the least since the 70s, and all of our guidelines have been based on it, when they reevaluated the literature, they saw no solid empirical evidence that would back up the hypothesis that dietary cholesterol was somehow adversely affecting our blood serum cholesterol levels. So if you hear that you should eat less eggs because you have high cholesterol, that may not be the most informed opinion. So do your homework and have a look at that, because it's really, really interesting. And then more recently, to put the final nail in the coffin on demonizing ancient and ancestral foods, the JAC, who are the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, have released a consensus statement, one of the biggest ones done in the last 20 or 30 years, saying, and I quote, "Whole fat dairy," now so that includes cream, cheese, butter, all those sorts of things, whole fat dairy, unprocessed meats of any kind, eggs, dark chocolate, and foods rich in saturated fatty acids are not associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So meat, eggs, cheese, cream do not increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. So a complete 180 on the last 20 or 30 years that we've had of thinking that optimizing your health was all about calories in, calories out, or it was all about, reducing your intake of saturated fats, meats, and so on. So this graph hasn't come across great in this particular one. I usually have it on PowerPoint. Okay, but you get the idea. So there was the implementation of the low-fat guidelines at the number 12.2, which was in 1978. The prevalence of obesity was 12.2%. Had marginally gone up from the decade before. With the implementation of the low-fat guidelines at that point, the obesity rates, but also diabetes, hypertension, which is high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, which is just a fancy way of saying high levels of harmful cholesterol, all shot up steadily over the last 30 or 40 years. Now, as a scientist, my background is in science, I can't say just because there was a sudden explosion in obesity in Western countries, it was all because of the increase in processed foods and refined carbohydrates and Pop-Tarts and muffins and cereal bars and breakfast cereals instead of real foods like meat and eggs and vegetables. But what I can do is I can look at what we call in the scientific world a control group. So a control group are the countries or tribes around the world that didn't get the memo that we should be eating less fat, that didn't get the memo that it was all about calories, and didn't get the memo that we should be eating much more processed carbohydrate. These are the Loma Lindens, the Nicoyans in Costa Rica, the Sardinians in Italy, the Icarians in Greece, and the Okinawans in Japan. Now, what all of these places have in common is, number one, they're not all that concerned about calories. Number two, they would find it laughable that we should be eating less fat because they've existed on it since the beginning of time. And number three, they avoid processed food. So it's not about whether they eat meat or whether they don't. And I always have this discussion with people, and I find it very easy to find a common ground if I'm chatting to someone who's vegan or vegetarian, and they say, well, is it better to eat meat or is it better to eat vegetables? Well, actually, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. Personally, I'm a fan of meat, but if you exclude processed, refined foods, you're going to optimize your health. So avoiding all the foods that I'm going to show you in a second. So a question I get sometimes in seminars is, well, maybe we did it wrong. Maybe we didn't comply with the guidelines. But actually, if you look at the data from the USDA Economic Research Service, we did comply with the guidelines. We did eat what we were told to. We ate 38% less butter. And by that, I mean we replaced it with margarines that were marked as light and low calorie and spreadable and so on. We had 18% less eggs. We bought 13% less animal protein. And we consumed vastly more amounts of grains and sugar, breakfast cereals, breads, granola bars, and so on. So this slide, guys, is absolutely key. It's a crucial slide because what I want to show you here in this particular slide is the role of a hormone that you may never have heard of, but will absolutely transform your health if you can put it into practice and get a basic understanding of it. And that hormone is insulin. So basically, insulin is a hormone that it's many physiological roles around the body. The main ones are to, from this point of view at least, to lower your blood sugar levels. And it's also a key hormone involved in a process known as lipolysis, which just means fat storage. So it makes you gain weight. So if you think about any time you eat food, it's either carbohydrate, protein, fat, or a combination of all three of those. Now, when you eat fat, so say, for example, you have some nuts or you have something like that, or you have some cream with strawberries, that doesn't cause insulin production because, again, insulin is only really produced when you eat a lot of carbohydrate. So insulin is produced when you eat protein and to a lesser degree, much lesser degree, fat. It's almost a neutral response when you eat fat, a little bit when you eat protein, but hugely if you eat processed carbohydrate. Now, this is a massive distinction I want to make. I am absolutely pro carbohydrates in their natural form. So things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, fruits, vegetables, leafy green vegetables, beans, nuts, legumes, and so on. I know we have a fabulous cooking demonstration coming shortly, which is going to be a kind of a bean-based burger as far as I know. That stuff is absolutely fantastic. But if you're eating cereal, rice in large amounts, granola bars, pasta, breads in general, not all of them because you can make the banana and flour too, what happens is your pancreas secretes a hormone known as insulin. And insulin's job is to reduce your blood sugar levels, but in doing that, it blocks your body's ability to burn fat anytime you're in a high insulin state, and it causes fat storage as well. So it's a real double-edged sword. So insulin leads to fat storage. And in a second, we look at which foods lead to high levels of insulin, but they are processed, refined carbohydrates, and we'll go through those shortly. So insulin leads to weight gain. Now, this kind of blows out of the water the idea that it's all just about calories in versus calories out. There's a certain amount of truth to that, but also the quality of the calories is hugely important. So if you're eating, for example, calories that are, relatively low in processed carbohydrates, it's a whole food source of calories, it's a moderate amount of protein, or it's high in fat. Let's use the example of an avocado. I mean, we all know on every level that a calorie is not a calorie and they're not all equal. Because if you think about it, if you swapped out having your avocado in the morning for 2 cream eggs, which is actually the same amount of calories, roughly speaking, we all know your health will be drastically different. So it's the hormonal effect of what those foods do to your body that will dictate whether you store or burn fat for energy. So let's take a look at insulin's ability to predict obesity, and this one is really interesting. So this was a study where it was known as the Bogalusa heart study. I believe it was done in Colombia, where they looked at children in 1996 and they tracked them over an 8-year period, but they also tracked their insulin level. So essentially what they're checking in their insulin level is how much processed carbohydrate, sugary stuff, and so on are they eating, not calories. Calories wasn't factored into it at all. And if you look on the left, the kids who were in the persistently low insulin level, so the guys who had they were in the bottom 25% of insulin levels, only had a 2% chance of being obese. But the children who were in the persistently high insulin category, when they were checking their insulin level, had almost an 80% chance of being obese. So just by checking their insulin level when they were 7 or 8 years of age, you could guess to an 80% accuracy level whether they were going to be obese or not when they grow up. Now, another thing insulin does, and not just insulin, but insulin resistance, and I'm briefly going to explain the term insulin resistance in a very easy, simple way, and it's much more complicated than this. But insulin resistance is essentially a state that your body goes into when it becomes resistant or ignores the action of insulin. So your body is producing lots and lots of insulin when you're eating these kind of higher levels of carbohydrates and rice and pasta, breads, granola bars, pizzas, ice cream, and so on. And eventually what happens is there's a wear out of the cells in the pancreas, which are known as the beta islet cells. They kind of burn out. And your body keeps producing more and more insulin, but it's kind of like having noise on in the background. It kind of drowns out after a while. And your body can't effectively use insulin anymore. So you end up in a state where your body can't effectively use insulin, but it's producing tons of it to try and make up for the fact that it can't use it. So you're in a really high insulin state is basically all that means. So I'm going to get a little bit sciencey here now and indulge, and then I'll break it down as well. But we know now that insulin resistance causes high blood pressure. So we've heard for the longest time that high blood pressure is probably caused by salt, and I'll explain why we believe that. But we know now it's caused by the same thing that causes diabetes, the same thing that causes obesity, and the same thing that causes weight gain, and that is insulin resistance. And how it does that is high insulin levels lead to diminished release of what's known as nitric oxide from the endothelium, and I'll explain what these mean in a second, and increased secretion of something known as endothelium 1, which is a potent vasoconstrictor. So essentially, what you're talking about here is high levels of insulin. So eating a lot of processed carbohydrate, again, the breads, the cereals, the rice, the granola bars, the fizzy drinks, and so on, irrespective of whether they're low calorie or not, causes your body to produce lots of insulin to try and lower your sugar levels. So carbohydrate or sugar, all the same thing. Carbohydrates are just molecules of glucose holding hands. Your body produces insulin. If you do that for long enough, over a long enough period of time, you become insulin resistant. That high level of insulin, so what happens with nitric oxide? Nitric oxide allows your blood vessels to dilate, to go out. So it diminishes the release of that. So it stops the blood vessel's ability to branch out or to expand out. So that's going to cause high blood pressure in itself. And then it also causes, through secretion of endothelium 1, your arteries to come back in, to squeeze back in. So you've got a real biphasic response there. So basically, it's restricting your arteries from relaxing, which is hugely important in blood pressure, and it's constricting them at the same time. And this last mechanism here is really interesting. It also signals to the kidneys to increase sodium retention. And this is why we thought for the longest time that salt causes high blood pressure. Salt in your arteries, which is very different to salt in your from your diet. Salt within your arteries causes fluid to come in, because fluid always follows salt. It's a key principle of biology. When you have salt in your arteries, you get fluid in the arteries, and that causes basically more pressure, because there's more fluid going through. The heart has to beat at a higher pressure. But it's not because of your intake of dietary salt necessarily. It's because your kidneys are causing your body to retain salt within the arteries. It does that under the action of insulin. So again, we have our friend insulin at the root cause there. And then finally, if that wasn't enough, if we look at cholesterol. So I'm often asked, well, what does cause high cholesterol if it's not eating eggs, if it's not eating fat, and so on? And it was kind of a very simplistic idea, actually, that eating cholesterol would make you get high cholesterol, in the same way that we know now that eating fat doesn't make you fat. And I kind of liken it to saying that if you drink water, you'll be full of water. Your body is hugely intelligent. And in fact, your liver makes 75% of the cholesterol in your body anyway. It's an absolutely essential nutrient in every cell in the body, without which we would die instantly. So what does cause high cholesterol is, again, our friend insulin, high levels of insulin. So insulin leads to an increase in something known as triglycerides, which are a really harmful, potentially harmful part of your cholesterol if they're up high. That has a knock-on effect of decreasing what are known as HDL, so high-density lipoproteins, which are cholesterol carriers. They're not cholesterol, but they're lipoproteins, they're cholesterol carriers. And it also causes an increase in the cholesterol referred to as LDL. Now, LDL is not as straightforward as just bad cholesterol. It's made up of pattern A, pattern B, kind of larger, fluffy, buoyant particles and small, dense LDL particles. So essentially, within your LDL, if you have high insulin levels, you get more harmful particles in your LDL cholesterol. So if we look at the genuine primary risk factors for heart disease, I love this slide because it sums it up beautifully. It's only a recent study over the last few years. So this is where they followed people for 10 years. They checked all their biomarkers. It's quite a large study. And they wanted to see what would predict heart disease. Now, your first guess, I suppose, if you're looking at the older literature, is probably cholesterol, or maybe bad cholesterol, or maybe something like that. But let me show you what they found. So high cholesterol, having a cholesterol of over 5, had a neutral effect on your risk for having a myocardial infarction or a heart attack or anything like that, anything cardiovascular based. A high LDL cholesterol, so the so-called bad cholesterol, having a high LDL cholesterol had a neutral effect on your risk ratio for heart disease. So not what you'd expect to see. Now, what did have a risk, an increase in your risk, was high blood pressure. If you had high blood pressure, you had double the risk of having heart disease. Now, irrespective of comorbidities, so all other conditions, if you had high insulin, you had a 6.7-fold increase in your likelihood of having a heart attack. So, for example, if your chance of having a heart attack for your age and status was 5%, you were up towards 30 to 35% if you had a high insulin level. So insulin is absolutely a hormone we need to understand about, and more specifically, hyperinsulinemia, high levels of insulin. So I'm going to show you guys today how we can get insulin low, how you can lower your weight, how you can lower your blood pressure, how you can optimize your cholesterol, and reverse diabetes as well, as we've shown in our clinical studies. So the first thing to know, and this is hugely important, is that lowering your blood sugar response to the foods that you eat is absolutely key. So understanding what macronutrients do to your body and what various different types of foods, how they affect your body, is hugely important. The reason blood sugars are important is because insulin, which is the key to avoiding chronic disease and reversing many chronic diseases, is secreted in response to glucose. So if you eat a lot of carbohydrate, all dietary carbohydrate is metabolized as glucose. So there's no problem if you're eating foods like strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, they're kind of lower fructose fruits. If you're eating foods like beans, nuts, legumes, potatoes, those sort of things, they're all absolutely fine in moderation. But if you're eating breakfast cereals, rice, breads, and so on, what happens with those foods, if you're eating them in large quantities, is your body has to break down the carbohydrate to glucose. It has no other way of breaking it down. Glucose is sugar. It's basically just another name, a kind of a medical term we use for sugar. And what happens is when you eat those foods, that bowl of cornflakes now, for example, which is 80 grams of carbohydrate, is metabolized down to roughly, believe it or not, 17 to 20 spoons of sugar in your blood. So your blood sugars go high after a high carb meal, then they drop down low. That's when you get hungry again. And insulin is secreted and your body gains weight. So if we can stop the foods that are spiking glucose and spiking insulin, we can transform our health. And those foods are fat and protein-based foods. And apologies for the shaky graph, actually, it just came across different in Google Slides. But protein-based foods, which is the higher graph there, the middle graph would say, protein-based foods have a much more steady response on insulin. It does cause some insulin secretion through a process known as gluconeogenesis mostly, but not to the same degree as processed carbohydrates at all. And you get steadier energy levels throughout the day. So if you look at the bottom line here, which is actually fat, the one that should be in blue, that has almost a neutral effect on your insulin levels. They barely spike at all. Your blood sugar levels barely spike at all. So if you ask anyone with diabetes to check your blood sugar levels after a bowl of cornflakes, the following morning have eggs and avocado and check your sugar levels after that, there will be a huge disparity between the two. The sugars after cornflakes most likely will be kind of 9 to 12. The sugars after the eggs and avocado, if you do it for long enough in particular, somewhere between 5 and 7, which are normoglycemic, so normal blood sugar levels. So this is, I'm often accused of being attacking cornflakes, but if you look at the likes of any breakfast cereal, really, we're told that it's only a certain amount of calories. It's only 120 calories. An interesting fact is your body doesn't use calories as currency. It uses hormones like insulin, ghrelin, leptin, glucagon, and so on. We're also told that it's only 3 grams of sugar per 30 gram serving. Well, this is disingenuous in 2 different ways. First of all, a serving of 30 grams is 2 tablespoons. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not eating 2 tablespoons of anything. And second of all dietary carbohydrate is metabolized as blood glucose. That's such a key sentence and thing that underpins all of health, is that all carbohydrate is boiled down as glucose. So if you drink 3 cans of Coke, or if you eat a big bowl of cornflakes, there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of the amount of sugar that's left in your blood, which means you're in a really high insulin state, which is going to lead to high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, overweight and obesity, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, and the list goes on. So the actual truth of these foods that we're told are low calorie and only have 3 grams of sugar is that you end up with roughly 21 spoons of sugar in your blood by the time it's fully metabolized. So certainly not one to choose, in my opinion. Now, this is interesting. This is from Dr. David Unwin, which he published in the Journal of Insulin Resistance, where he looked at the concept of why don't we try and educate people by showing them how much a portion of the food that they're eating that's carbohydrate based turns into in sugar in the blood. And again, he published this in quite a reputable journal in 2016. So serving size of basmati rice, 150 grams. We probably eat double that when we get the kind of carton of takeaway or for having a big curry. Will leave you with roughly 10 spoons of sugar in your blood. Potatoes, just 150 grams, 9 spoons of sugar in your blood. Spaghetti, and so on, the list goes on. So breads, pasta, rice, a lot of which are going to be the staple in my diet and in your diet. So I'll give you some alternatives for those shortly. Now, if you look down the bottom with whole foods, things like broccoli, eggs, meats, low sugar vegetables, low sugar fruits, all those real whole foods that haven't been processed at all, for the most part, tend to be very, very low in terms of how much sugar will end up in your blood. But these are the foods to avoid if you're treating diabetes. But this slide absolutely applies to optimizing your health, lowering your cholesterol, I should say, optimizing your cholesterol, not necessarily lowering your cholesterol, reversing type 2 diabetes, getting your weight down, and reversing high blood pressure. These are the ones that you want to avoid or eat less of. So it's not realistic for a lot of people just to say, I'm going to cut out bread altogether. But you'll notice there's quite a few recipes out there online now for lower carbohydrate breads. And it's because people are beginning to understand the physiology of high insulin from eating bread and rice and pasta, causing all these chronic diseases. So you'll see on recipes like dietdoctor.com, Ready-Care Control, DTX.com, which is our own website, you'll see that we have lots of recipes for lower carbohydrate breads. So breads that are made with things like almond flour, coconut flour, and so on. So you can replace the breads if you're willing to make them yourself. What you'll also notice if you have your eyes open is if you go into the likes of a local supermarket, a Waitrose or whatever it is, you see they're selling cauliflower rice, and you'll be thinking, why on earth would I eat rice made of cauliflower? And the reason for that is if you can swap out your rice for cauliflower rice and do things like our next speaker is going to show you, like having bunless burgers, you're going to dramatically lower your insulin level, and it's going to just absolutely transform your health. So the foods that you want to avoid or replace or minimize your intake of: breads, rice and pasta, breakfast cereals, the obvious ones like fizzy drinks. Starchy vegetables are interesting. So they kind of exist in two categories at the same time. They are a whole food, and I'm all about whole foods, but they will absolutely lead to insulin resistance and, you know, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, weight gain, and so on, if you overconsume them. Cakes and pastries then are a disaster for a couple of reasons. So if you think about the way the body works, in a high insulin state, your body stores fat. So if I eat something that has a lot of carbohydrate and sugar in it, like a donut, but also has fat in it because it has icing or butter or whatever else, buttercream or whatever else is in it, I'm going to have high levels of insulin from the glucose being broken down from carbohydrate and the sugar. And then I'm going to have a lot of fat being stored because there's fat coming in as well. So again, carbohydrate forces your body to secrete insulin, whose main physiological role is to store fat. And then grain-based foods. So you might be looking at that and thinking, well, that's most of my diet. You've just described my diet. What am I left to eat? And what you're left to do is follow something like my first place to go would be to look up and start learning about an LCHF diet. Now, I like to call it low carbohydrate healthy fat, lower carbohydrate healthy fat. So that's going to consist of more foods like meats, fish and seafood, cheese, which would be full fat, real butter again, which would be full fat, nuts, beans, legumes, things like that, green vegetables. So any vegetable that grows above the ground is going to be much lower in starch. So the veg that grows below the ground is referred to as tuber family vegetables, grows below the ground, so it's going to be higher in starch. Eggs, and there is no need to limit your intake of eggs at all. Omelets are absolutely fantastic. Again, according to the USDA guidelines of 2016, there's no evidence to suggest we should be limiting our dietary cholesterol intake, nor is there any evidence that meat or eggs are in any way deleterious to human health insofar as it's been shown in empirical scientific evidence. Good fats like avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oil, and then full fat dairy, including cream. And I know that's a hard one to swallow because you just think, God, we've been told for, decades that we should be avoiding all these sort of foods. So let's take a quick look at the main steps for preventing and treating chronic disease. So first and foremost, we should be looking to reduce our intake of refined carbohydrates. Now, when I talk about the steps to treating and preventing chronic diseases, Again, we've shown in our literature, you can fully reverse type 2 diabetes. You can absolutely reverse high blood pressure. You can lower your cholesterol to a point, or optimize your cholesterol to a point that you can come off all your medications. And we're seeing this time and time and time again. So if you just reduce your caloric intake, you may lose weight. But unfortunately, the longitudinal studies have shown that just implementing a caloric restriction tends to backfire. You get a lowering or a more sluggish BMR, basal metabolic rate, which is metabolism, if you want to say it that way, and the weight goes back on. But we've all been there. We've all lost a couple of stone and then gone on to the diet we used to eat and put it back on. So this is known as, or referred to, if you want to look it up, as the CIMO model of obesity. There's been hundreds, if not thousands, of papers published on it, numerous books written on it. And the CIMO stands for Carbohydrate Insulin Model of Obesity. So our patients, when they follow our protocol, just to give you an example, do not count calories at all whatsoever. So we're reversing chronic disease like type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, sleep apnea, PCOS, all of these diseases that are intertwined and underpinned by insulin resistance without counting calories, and weight loss of about 6 to 8 kgs in 10 to 12 weeks. So the key is to understand how the food you eat affects your hormones. So we want to reduce your intake of refined carbohydrates. So things like breads, cereal, granola bars, rice, pasta, and so on. Rice, a really easy swap for rice is to buy a cauliflower rice or make a cauliflower rice yourself. For potatoes is to have cauliflower mash instead of normal mash. And you'd be surprised how quickly you get used to it. I often get weekly, we get an Indian takeaway, and I get a butter masala. And I just have cauliflower rice at home. So I just pop the rice that comes with it in the bin, or give it to the dog, and have the cauliflower rice with my butter masala. And I might have a lamb tikka for starter or something like that. So mostly protein and fat based. Avoiding sugar at all costs. We've known for the longest time that sugar causes cancer, causes weight gain, causes high blood pressure, dyslipidemia. And now we know that processed carbohydrates do the same because of the way they're all boiled down, being metabolically quite similar. So avoiding your intake of sugary, processed, and refined carbohydrates is certainly important. Intermittent fasting. So this one quite pertinent considering we're in the middle of Ramadan, or you guys are in the middle of Ramadan. Intermittent fasting has been shown to be absolutely transformational for your health. And excuse the subtitle below talking about good fast. They just popped in the picture because I thought it would be worth mentioning. So periods of kind of more prolonged fasting, or even, kind of a 12 to 14 hour fast, has been shown to reduce systemic inflammation, reduce oxidative stress, so just stress in the body. It's good for fat loss because it lowers the hormone insulin. It increases testosterone, human growth hormone, meaning it's good for your skin. And it actually promotes a process known as cellular autophagy, coming from the Greek autophagy, meaning to eat oneself. And this was discovered by a doctor by the name of Dr. Yoshinari Oshumi, who won the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine in 2016 for his discovery of it. And there's some amazing books on it. And there's actually quite a bit of literature showing that there's differences in the health of individuals during the fasting period in Ramadan. One thing you do want to be careful of is not overloading yourself with a lot of processed carbohydrate when you do break your fast, because you're in a particularly insulin sensitive state at the end of your fast. So your insulin is so low that even a small amount of carbohydrate when you break your fast can cause a lot of weight gain. That's why we tend to gain weight if we eat late at night as well. It's because of how sensitive your body is to glucose, and more specifically insulin. So what I would say is, if you're breaking your fast, having something like creamy or fat-based or protein-based would be a good way to break your fast, and maybe just minimizing down your intake of the processed carbohydrates. So the whole, I suppose, the whole thing that underpins our approach and what the scientific literature has shown for the last few years is not all that controversial if you break it down. So sometimes people like to say, oh well, that's I'm not sure about a low carb diet, or sounds a bit like Atkins or something like that. But look, if you take a step back, if you reduce your intake of processed foods, and we all agree, everyone is in agreement that processed foods are deleterious for human health. They are in no way healthy for a human. And you remove all the processed foods out of your diet, what are you left with? If you're going to your local butcher, your fish counter, your dairy, you're eating fruits and vegetables, nobody could argue that that's unhealthy. You're left with a lower carbohydrate, higher healthy fat diet. So what I always say when I'm teaching this stuff, and I got a great answer from my students a few years back when I was lecturing. I asked them when I was lecturing in a college, and I said to them, can you come up with, in 5 words or less, the best advice you can give to someone when it comes to their diet for treating chronic disease? And one girl came up with the answer, eat like your grandparents did, which I thought was excellent. So much less processed food, much more locally sourced whole foods. And the other answer I thought was fantastic was eat single ingredient foods. And I said, what do you mean by single ingredient? And the guy in the class said to me, which was very clever, he said, well, you've got 70 or 80 ingredients in Cheerios that you can't even pronounce. But tell me the ingredients in an avocado. Tell me the ingredients in a strawberry. Tell me the ingredients in beans or meat or cheese or anything like that. There's one ingredient. So it's an ancestrally appropriate, species appropriate diet is at the key to treating the root cause of many chronic diseases, which is hyperinsulinemia or high levels of insulin. And then finally, exercise. So exercise is hugely important. Interestingly enough, when you look at the literature, not as important as you would think for weight loss, or not as effective as you would think for weight loss, unless your diet is good, unless you've got a diet that's conducive to you burning fat in the first place. Okay, and I've just got some references there, guys, just in case anyone has any questions later on. So that's my little bit for the moment. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm looking forward to our next speaker, Sister Farzana. Thank you for joining as well, and any questions, I'd be delighted to take them shortly. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that incredibly informative and well-structured presentation. There's certainly a lot that we can all learn and implement. I loved the journey that you described of how our guidelines have come about, and how perhaps what we've been hearing over the last 30 to 40 years is often, perhaps not something that can be truly backed by the science. It's great news that we can eat unlimited eggs and meat, so that's fantastic. Thank you for that. And also an answer to the question that I commonly hear about why we might actually, some of us, be gaining weight during the month of Ramadan due to that kind of insulin sensitive state at the end of the fast. So particularly important time to avoid refined carbohydrates and processed foods. So yeah, some of my take home messages from that really are to reduce our intake of processed foods, reduce the intake of refined carbohydrates, and instead think about a low carb, healthy fat diet, single ingredient foods, perhaps the things that our grandparents would have as their standard diet. So thank you so much for that really, really incredibly informative presentation. Once again, to our viewers, feel free to write your questions in the comment section, and we will try and answer as many as we can in the Q&A section at the end. Next, we'll be having a live cooking demonstration by Sister Farzana Walji Hooda. I've certainly been looking forward to this myself, even if it does make us a little bit hungry. Sister Farzana is a fully qualified personal trainer and level 3 fitness instructor with a keen interest in nutrition and holistic living. She specializes in female health and has a passion for transforming the lives of women, not only in the way they look, but how they feel. Farzana is often called upon to talk at schools and other community events on the importance of leading a healthy lifestyle, eating well, keeping fit, and maintaining a positive mindset. It is my pleasure now to hand over to Sister Farzana Walji Hooda.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much, Dr. Sheppard. That was extremely insightful, and I've certainly learned a lot as well. I'm glad we're on the same page with the whole foods. I'm really excited to show you today. We're going to be making a black bean burger. And the reason for black beans today is because they're full of fiber. They're a great source of plant protein, and also is better for the environment in terms of lowering your ecological footprint. So we're going to start by, I've just got some black beans here. And what I've done just before we came on was I just put them onto a tray, a glass tray, and I put them in the oven for just around 5-10 minutes, just to dry them out slightly. And this will actually make sure that you don't have a soggy burger, because there's nothing worse than having a soggy burger. So if you're not keen on meatless burgers, I hope this changes your mind. We're going to start with putting 1 onion into a pan, gently heat just a little bit of oil in there. I've just sprayed a tiny bit of oil in there. I'm just going to turn this on. And just on a very low heat, I'm just going to put that into the pan. And then I've got a red pepper that's obviously full of antioxidants as well, vitamin C, and great for supporting your immune system. So putting that in. I've also got half a yellow pepper, putting that in as well. Lots of vibrant colors today. And I'm just going to cook that for a little while. I've also got some minced garlic here, courtesy of my mum. She minces that and gives that to me, which is lovely. But you can just use a clove of garlic and just crush it and put it in. So we're just going to cook that down just very slightly, just maybe for about 5 to 6 minutes. And we just want to dry that out as well. We don't want any excess moisture in there. Whilst that's cooking, I'm just going to show you the side dish for today. So we're going to make a little guacamole. And as Dr. Sheppard said, avocados are a great source of fat and great food to introduce into your diet. So I've got one medium avocado here. I'm just going to slice it in half, take the stone out, and show you how simple it is to make an avocado dip. So we've just got the avocado in here. I've just mashed that up. I had to do it beforehand because my hands were getting so dirty. So I hope you don't mind. I've just mashed that up. Just added half a lime, squeeze that in. I've just chopped a little bit of spring onions. I don't like it too oniony, so I'm just going to put a little bit in there. You can put however much you like. If you like it more oniony, then you can. Just mix that all together. And love some chili flakes. So just a small bit of chili flakes in there. And just mix that up. And that's literally it for the guacamole. And that smells, I can smell that from here. It smells absolutely amazing. So I'm just going to check on this. And that's cooking away quite nicely. Just softening that. Shouldn't take too long. And I love loads of color in my food. I love, my plates to be lots of vibrant colors. So I'm going to show you the salad, which I love with these burgers. So on my plate, I've just got, half my plate is full of greens. I love greens. These are just a herb salad, baby leaf, spinach, rocket in there, whatever you fancy. I've got some mint. What else have I got? Some chives. Any salad that you like, just pop it on the plate. I've now chosen a selection of different kind of veggies and fruits. So I've got different types of tomatoes there, just cherry tomatoes. I've got yellow and orange. My dad's also growing loads and loads of tomatoes in his garden, which I'm really excited about. I think I'll be going over there quite often to get lots of bits and bobs. We've got some peppers, cucumbers. I absolutely love beetroot. I know, Mahdi, your mum absolutely loves beetroot as well. And I understand you've been all making beetroot juice, which I also tasted, which was amazing. So lots of beetroot in there. And that's really high in iron as well, which is great for women. So I'm just going to put that onto my salad. I also love figs on a salad. You might find it a bit strange, but actually figs really work with a salad. And obviously figs are mentioned in the Quran as well as a really wholesome, nutrient-rich food, and fibrous too. So I'm just going to put that in there. Apparently we're having internet problems, so I'm just going to get Kareem to sort my computer out just for a moment. So I'm not sure if you can see whilst he's just sorting that computer technical issue, I'm just going to stir this here, just see how it's coming along. Just turn the heat up a little bit. And that's cooking away nicely, softening there. It's taking a little longer than normal, so sorry about that. But here's my beautiful salad. So I've prepared that, looking absolutely delicious, colourful. I can't wait to tuck into this later. And on that, I'm just going to spray a bit of extra virgin olive oil on that. So I actually buy olive oil and put it in glass bottles. This one's just a shop bought one as well. It's just a normal extra virgin olive oil, good quality one. So I'm just spraying that on my salad. If you wanted to, you could put some balsamic vinegar, some lemon, whatever you fancy. I just like it like that. Oh, I forgot my walnuts as well. So this is done now. I'm just going to turn the heat off. And this is when we start making the actual burgers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my black beans into my mixer. Now, you don't have to have a mixer. If you don't have one, absolutely fine. You can work up, use your muscles and do a bit of a bicep workout by pressing those and mashing them with a masher. I'm just going to put this in here, hoping my mixer works today. And I've got the onion and the pepper mix. Now, if there is a bit of water or moisture in that, you can just blot it with a little paper towel and just get any moisture out, because you want to get them as dry as possible so that they form nicely. So I'm going to put this mixture into the bowl. And this smells amazing already. So all of it goes inside. Don't like to waste anything, so I'm putting every little bit inside. Okay, so now is the interesting part with all the spices. I've got 1 cup of, all the measurements, by the way, have been emailed out. If you need any, just contact me or message me on my Instagram. But I've got a cup of homemade breadcrumbs there, just wholemeal breadcrumbs. I just toasted those and then whack them in the whizzer. I have got 2 organic eggs, putting those in there. And I'm so glad, Dr. Sheppard, that you said about the eggs, because we love eggs in this house. Eggs for breakfast every day. I'm going to put 1.5 teaspoons of cumin. So mum style, I'm just going to whack it in about 1.5 teaspoons. We've got 1 teaspoon of chili powder. Now, if you don't like chili, you can omit this, but it really does give it a nice edge. And obviously, depending on your chili powder, you don't want it too hot, but just gauge according to your taste. I've got 1/2 teaspoon of hot paprika in there. Got some garlic granules. Absolutely love garlic granules. They really bring the taste out. So that's a really good one to put in. And we've got 1 teaspoon of that, or a bit more. Now I've got feta cheese here. Feta cheese is quite salty, so I haven't added any more salt into this dish. So I'm popping that into there. And this makes them, give that really creamy flavor. What else have I got? Right, I've got some ketchup here, and this is no sugar, no salt ketchup. And there's a brand which is called Dr. Will's, which is really good. And that's like a really natural ketchup. It's just tomatoes and a few seasonings. So I'm going to whack that in there. Worcester sauce. I've got a tablespoon of Worcester sauce. Just put that in there. I love Worcester sauce. If you're vegan, you can obviously leave that out because that has anchovies in it. And then loads and loads of pepper. I absolutely love pepper. Lots of spice, lots of flavor. So my mum does tell me I don't put enough salt in my food. So if you find that they need a little bit, I don't think they do because of the feta cheese, but you might want to add a little bit. Now I'm just going to whiz this up. Just need to check that I've got everything in. Yes, right. You might need to turn your volume down very slightly. Now, depending if you like things a bit chunky with a bit of bite, then feel free to mix it only a little bit. But if you want, you can, if you don't, my kids don't like to see beans and things, so I'm going to whiz it up quite a lot. Just going to mix that up a bit. And we're nearly done. Nearly done. Okay, great. So I've got a little bit of bite in there. Now, a really great tip when you're handling mushy things, if you just dampen your hands very slightly, then things don't stick all over the place. But we're going to put the pan on now. Now, sometimes I make these in the oven, sometimes I'll grill them, sometimes I'll make them on the pan, it just depends. But if you do them slightly on the pan and then put them in the oven, that works really well. But today I'm just going to do them in the pan just for time. So a little bit of oil in the pan, in the frying pan. Just going to dampen my hands. Okay, so I've lost my cup, but where's it gone? Okay, so about a third cup, I use my measuring cups to measure out how much I need so that they're all equal in size. But I'm going to get about a third and just make a little patty. And this wet hands thing really does work. It doesn't stick to your hands so much as it would normally. So just a nice shaped patty, and I'm going to put that into the frying pan, just with that little bit of oil, medium heat. And another one. And these can be made in advance. I like to freeze them on busier days and then take them out and just warm them up in the oven. Oh, Sophia, I have a helper now. So we're just going to put that in. Okay, right, we've got one more. I'll just put one more in. And this smells absolutely delicious. Okay, so I'm just going to wash my hands. Sophie, I'm not putting them all in the pan, sweetie. My kids like to pop up from nowhere. Brilliant, that's brilliantly shaped. Put that in, Sophia, if you can fit. So we'll put those in the tray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake these ones, the rest of them, on a baking sheet. So a baking tray. These glass trays are great. So I just spray some oil on them and then put those in the oven on around 190 degrees C. There we go. So Sophie, if you wouldn't mind coming over here, sweetie, and then you can make those for me. And on my salad as well, I absolutely love to put some nuts, walnuts, seeds. So I've just got these walnuts here. I love walnuts. They're great for the brain, and actually they look like a brain as well. So I like to tell the kids that it will make you nice and brainy. So I'm just waiting for those. And they're full of omega-3s as well. Great for brain health, great for the skin, heart healthy. They boost your mood. So everywhere I can, I'm just adding in lots of nice healthy bits and bobs. And beetroot's great for the skin as well. It's a really good antioxidant. It's got lots of vitamin B6, great for your metabolism and cell function. But obviously everything works in synergy together, so it's all about having a balanced, healthy diet. So these are just cooking away nicely. I'm just going to turn these now. And they're very nearly done. And break. So, trying to keep them nice and round. So does Mom Nawasi, do you have any questions or anything whilst those are cooking? Can I answer some questions maybe?
Yeah, well, we've had a few various comments coming in, which is great. So I'd just like to encourage people to make use of the comments. Do pose your questions and comments, and we can get to them in the question and answer session. And as you mentioned, Sister Farzana, the recipe has been emailed out this morning for those who would like to refer to it again. But thank you. This looks like it's going to be an extremely tasty dish when it's done.
It smells absolutely amazing. I wish you could smell it here. There's quite a few number of hours to wait, 4 hours, 4.5 hours to wait, which is fine.
I think I'm a little bit glad that I can't at the moment. Otherwise, I would be very hungry, I'm sure.
So we're just going to turn this one. And so once these are done on the pan, what I normally do is I would pan fry them with literally a teeny bit of that spray oil and then put them in the oven for about, how long? About 20 minutes. And then they become really crispy and crunchy and really delicious. And I like them to eat them just as they are, with the guacamole on the side and a massive salad. You don't need a bun. It's, it's fibrous. It's got lots of complex carbohydrates that's going to keep you full during the day, and it's high in protein too. So I hope Dr. Sheppard will agree that it hits all the right criteria. So I'm just going to put that on the plate. And great. Put that on there and put the guacamole, which I love. And even, I have some fuss eaters here and even they love this, which is great. So there you go. There's a lovely, delicious meal for you. And yes, I hope you do try it and let me know if you do. I'd love to hear your comments and let me know if you like it as much as us. So thank you very much.
Well, they look absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Sister Farzana, for that demonstration. Thank you so much, Sister Farzana, for that demonstration. And Sophia as well. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for the handy tip about wet hands. And I think you're lucky that there's lockdown restrictions still in place. Otherwise, I'm sure you'd probably have a few unexpected guests around iftar time this evening. But lots for Brother Reza and the whole family over there to be looking forward to, I'm sure. Once again, for those on the Wessex mailing list, the recipe has been emailed out this morning. If you'd like to watch the demo again, whilst perhaps preparing the meal yourself, this event will be available to view on the Wessex Jamaat YouTube page. And of course, you can also watch, again, Dr. Sheppard's presentation, which had tons of information there. We can see some comments coming through about the bean burgers, which look absolutely delicious. So next, we're going to move on to our Q&A session. So I'm going to bring our speakers back into the stream. Fantastic. So we've had loads of questions coming through. That's fantastic. Thank you. Do feel free to keep posting and we'll answer as many as we can. We'll start off with, let's have a look. So we have a question here saying, I usually have butter rather than margarine. Is that better? I'll go over to Andy to answer that question if possible.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mo. For sure. Butter is absolutely better. So the idea that margarines would be better than butters is based on the premise of the Cimo paradigm, calories in, calories out. So they're lower in calories, so therefore they'd be better than us, better for us than real butter. Real butter is absolutely better for you, 100%. Yeah, I would be absolutely a proponent of real butter. The problem with margarines is they get low fat and low in calories because they take out the natural fats, so the saturated fats and things like that. And ironically, saturated fat has never been proven to be deleterious to human health in any way, shape, or form. But then they replace it with what are known as partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, which are seed oils, which we now know from the literature over the last 7 or 8 years in particular are pro-inflammatory. So ironically, the stuff like I can't believe it's not butter or your floral lights and stuff are actually much more inflammatory to your heart than creamery butters like real butter. So ghee butter or real butter is absolutely the way to go.
Thank you so much. And slightly related to that, actually, you did mention saturated fats. There's a question here. For someone who's been diagnosed with high cholesterol, for example, particularly LDL, should they be concentrating on reducing saturated and trans fats or reducing carbohydrates? What would you say to that?
Reducing carbohydrates for sure. So if you look at the pathophysiology of dyslipidemia, of high cholesterol, you don't get high cholesterol because you're eating saturated fat or you're eating cholesterol. You get high cholesterol because you have systemic inflammation and oxidative stress within the arteries. Cholesterol comes along, then cholesterol, calcium, and ferritin tries to do their job, and then the cholesterol kind of gets blocked up actually behind the lining of the artery, which a lot of people don't know. So the subendothelial lining. So I would for sure be looking at reducing your intake of processed refined carbohydrates. So all the kind of junk foods and things like that are marketed as low fat, low calorie and are supposed to be great for us. I would be introducing exactly what we saw in that last demonstration, real whole foods combined into really tasty foods, but I would not be limiting my intake of saturated fat. I'd be reducing carbohydrate.
Thank you so much. Question here for Sister Farzana. Can you substitute the black beans for another bean or pea at all?
That's my husband. Yeah, you can use kidney beans, you can use turtle beans, you can use, you could even use chickpeas, any bean but make sure you dry them out first. You don't want a soggy burger, as I was saying. But I think that black beans work best. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I've got a question here about sweeteners. What about the use of sweeteners, for example, sucralose-based or xylitol-based ones? What effect do these have on insulin levels? If I could go over to Andy to answer that, please.
Sure, yeah, no problem. So I've actually been borderline obsessed enough / maybe perceived as pathetic enough to check this out myself by wearing a continuous glucose monitor and eating all the sweeteners, 2 tablespoons of each just to see. So you've got sweeteners like sucralose, definitely not a good idea. Actually has quite a high glycemic response. Xylitol is one that's touted as being, having no insulin response, but actually when you check it, it has about a 60% similar glycemic response as sugar itself. So the better sweeteners, to my mind, are one called allulose and another called erythritol. They're going to be the 2 best ones. Stevia is not too bad, but allulose and erythritol are the 2 that have almost a completely neutral effect on your blood sugar levels. So I would say sucralose, maybe not, and xylitol in moderation. Xylitol is useful though because it's granulated, so it can be substituted for sugar, but it's not brilliant.
Thank you. And slightly similar question, but this time about more natural sugars, particularly things like fruits, syrups such as honey and maple syrup as well. What impact do these have on the insulin response, Andrew? Yeah,
so it's an interesting one. It's a great question, Alicia, because they don't actually particularly influence your blood sugar levels, and so you don't get much of an insulin response for them. But when you follow the metabolic pathway of fructose, which is the fruit sugar that Alicia's referring to, it actually causes fatty liver 7 times more than eating glucose itself. So for the longest time, we thought, well, it's natural and it's fruit, so it won't be that bad for you. But actually, if you follow the metabolic pathway of fructose, it doesn't spike your blood sugar levels, But because the body doesn't know what to do with it, it bypasses the insulin pathway and goes directly to the liver, where it's converted to triglycerides. So we all know high triglycerides is not a good thing, one of the parameters and diagnostic criteria of metabolic syndrome. So sugars from fruit are okay in small amounts. So I would say I would veer much more towards things like raspberries, strawberries, blackberries, and the kind of more lower fructose fruits. And personally, I would avoid bananas, grapes, tropical fruits, but particularly if you're insulin resistant, if you have type 2 diabetes, if you're overweight, or you have high blood pressure. So lower fructose fruits are fine.
That's really interesting, actually. Thank you so much for clarifying that. It is quite a common question, isn't it? And we have had a few questions, kind of, what about this food or that food? And I think, that's great to be getting those questions, because it's giving us, a really good understanding of actually how we can practically, take these lessons and implement them into our diet. So another similar question is about what are your views on wholemeal carbohydrates? So bread and chapatis made of wholemeal grains and flour. Is this different to perhaps other types of bread or carbohydrates, and should we be limiting these as well?
Yes, we should, for sure. So I suppose the idea that wholemeal and whole grain are much, much better for stems from looking back at the GI diet, the research around glycemic index of foods, which is basically just a science that looks at how your blood sugar levels are affected by different varieties and different types of foods. The problem is, when you look at the GI of those kind of whole grains, they're lower than white bread. So whole grain bread is absolutely better than white bread, but the margin that they lower or differ by is not all that much. It's about 3 to 4%. So if you look at the real end points there in terms of your blood sugar levels, 2 slices of white bread will leave you with blood sugar levels similar to 11 spoons of sugar. 2 slices of whole grain bread will leave you with blood sugar levels similar to about 10 spoons of sugar. So there is a difference, but if you look at that versus a couple of boiled eggs or avocado or spinach or anything that's kind of much lower in the carbohydrate content, it's definitely a better idea to be, eating more whole foods as opposed to whole grain. So in moderation, it might be okay, but I would absolutely limit them. Yeah, it's a great question.
Great, thank you. And on a practical note, for Sister Farzana, do you have any particular suggestions? Can you perhaps share any of your Sehri ideas? Obviously, we're in the month of Ramadan at the moment. What kind of things might you suggest that we actually have in the morning to help during the fast?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we tend to, high protein foods are obviously very satiating. So you're going to feel fuller for longer, and fibrous foods as well. So I might make, for example, I made a overnight oats with, but I was actually going to ask a question to you, Dr. Sheppard, because how does oats then fare, being a grain as well? Will that cause the same insulin response as wholemeal bread then?
Not to the same degree, Sister Farzana, because the proper oats, if you get the kind of jumbo cut steel oats, those kind of proper ones, they don't cause the same sort of hyperinsulinemic response that we'd say, for example, breakfast cereals or things like that. So they'd be maybe 50-60% better. But a really interesting stat actually is, those kind of instant oats that you can get that are really chopped down really fine. If you measure a bowl of those versus a bowl of actual sugar, the glycemic response from the instant oats is higher for the same serving size, 100 grams of each. So as bizarre as that sounds, there's actually foods out there that will give you a higher blood sugar level than eating sugar itself, and instant oats are one of those. But jumbo oats are fine. They're a much better choice.
Yeah, so thank you for that. We have a lot of Greek yogurt with sprinkling of oats. We love, soft dried fruits, raspberries, pumpkin seeds in there. Even I put grated carrots into my yogurt. It sounds bizarre, but actually it really works and it's delicious. So egg cups, pre-made in advance the night before and then eaten in the morning. Those are great as well, high protein foods, and foods full of water as well. So cucumbers, it's come out of my mind now. Peppers, all these foods which are going to hydrate you and because we can't maybe drink as much. So it's good to eat that food to hydrate you instead.
Yeah, I've been cutting up some watermelon this morning for us to have this evening, which has got quite a lot of water in there. But we've got another question here from Sabira Auntie. So I'll bring that up. It says, does the finger prick sugar test relate to insulin level or insulin resistance? Obviously, this is the kind of test that people, particularly with diabetes, might be familiar with, where you just do a finger prick test and it'll tell you what your capillary sugar level is, your blood sugar level is at that point in time. How well does that correlate with insulin levels and insulin resistance, Dr. Sheppard?
Yeah, very much so, Mo, because what you're checking in that particular test is not insulin per se. You're actually checking your blood glucose level, which again is just our way of saying your blood sugar level. So how it relates to insulin level and insulin resistance is there's a direct correlation between your blood glucose level and your insulin level, because one of the key physiological processes that insulin governs is lowering your blood sugar levels. So for example, if your blood sugars are 4 in the morning, there's probably very little insulin being secreted by the body. If your blood sugars are 11 or 12, there's a significant amount of insulin being secreted. So although it's difficult, I know there's a couple of companies that are showing home or have developed home insulin tests, but for the moment, being able to check your blood sugar levels is going to be a really good way of being able to see what your insulin levels are. You get a really good idea. So it's checking your blood sugar levels, but that's going to let you know how much insulin your body needs to produce. So it's a good indicator. It's a good proxy for insulin or insulin resistance.
Thank you so much. Another question here. What about quinoa or sorghum grains or flour? And I know that you mentioned that you quickly referenced that there are other types of flour that can be used as well. So I wonder if perhaps you might be able to elaborate on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, sure. So quinoa is not bad. It's kind of middle of the road. So there are quite a few carbohydrates that you wouldn't call refined carbohydrates. So for example, the kind of beans, nuts, legumes, and the sort of stuff that Sister Farzana showed in her cooking demonstration, absolutely perfect, because it's not a highly processed food. All of our ingredients are just amazing single whole foods brought together into a delicious meal. That's how everybody should be eating. So well done on that. It was fantastic. So to answer the question, yeah, quinoa is okay in moderation. It's got a moderate amount of carbs, which are offset by a good bit of dietary fiber in it. And there are certain grains that are okay, not your typical flours. Typical flours tend to have an extremely high glycemic load, but things like almond flour and coconut flour tend to be a lot better, much, much better. They're very, very low, the glycemic index, won't spike insulin, won't cause all those chronic conditions. So there are certain flours you can substitute in for sure.
Thank you so much. There's a question here by Natalie Sheppard. So I wonder if that's a relation of yours, Dr. Sheppard. That is my wife. Yeah, we have our family. We have our family tuning in. Oh, great! Yeah. Oh well,
Sister
welcome.
Farzana, you're not the only one. We family tuning in. That's okay though.
Oh, fantastic. Well, welcome, Mrs. Sheppard, as well. Thank you for allowing Dr. Sheppard to come on and spend some time with us on this lovely day. So her question is, why do studies come out saying that red meat has been linked to various diseases? Can you comment on that at all, Andy?
Yeah, it's a question I get asked a lot, and I really like that question, because there's a couple of different studies and different types of studies, and one of them are known as epidemiological studies, and this is crucial. If you see a link coming out or an article coming out, or somebody shares a study that says that red meat has been linked to, or saturated fat has shown to increase your chances of, both of those terms, linked to and increase your chances of, essentially mean nothing. It means nothing has been proven. And the drawing on epidemiological data, and epidemiological studies are studies where they typically do over really large numbers, like 50 or 100,000 people. They'll do what are known as food frequency questionnaires. So they'll ask people, how often do you eat red meat? How often do you eat saturated fat? And you say, I don't know, 3 times a week, usually for the past 10 years. And they'll draw a correlation between the number of times you eat red meat and the number of, the prevalence of cancer in that individual or that cohort. So drawing a connection between two things doesn't show a causative mechanism. It just shows that they're related. So there's some really fascinating examples of how epidemiological studies and data can go very wrong. There's a website, if anyone is interested in it, called Spurious Correlations. And one really tight correlation shows that the more Apple iPhones are bought, the more people die from falling down the stairs. Now, we would never say that buying an iPhone is going to make you fall down the stairs, but that's just an example of a correlation that's gone wrong. So there's not one randomized controlled trial to show that eating red meat, one group eats a healthy diet, another group eats a healthy diet with red meat, leads to cancer, heart disease, and so on. So it stems from epidemiological data, which is not really grounded in any empirical science.
Thank you so much. I know that we're due to finish at 4:30, so I think we'll probably wrap up for there. Thank you all for your amazing questions. We've had, all kinds of different questions. I've just seen one actually. I know that coconut oil is something that's being used perhaps increasingly, I think. Would you be able to give us an idea of what your views were on the use of coconut oil, Andy?
Sure, I think it's an absolute superfood. So coconut oil it's funny actually, because I often talk to people in seminars. I often get the question, they say to me, I avoid saturated fat because of the rhetoric and the messaging over the last 20 or 30 years. And I say to them, well, go through your diet and tell me what you usually have. And then they suddenly stumble across and say, well, I cook in coconut oil. Coconut oil is 98.4% saturated fat, but it's an amazingly good food. If you check the label on it, it'll be 100 per 100 grams of fat, 98 grams of saturated fat. But it's an amazing food. It's got something in it known as caprylic acid, which is particularly good for brain function. It's really good for helping to produce ketones. It can be used in Alzheimer's patients who have GLUT4 deficiencies and problems using glucose in the brain. It's an amazing anti-inflammatory food. Absolutely super.
Great, thank you. We've answered most questions, not quite all, so I do apologise if there are questions that we have missed. But once again, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and for asking your questions. A huge thanks to Andy Sheppard and Sister Farzana for joining us today. It's been hugely informative for me, and I hope that's been the case for all of our viewers here today as well. A reminder that you can watch the event again. It will be on the Wessex Jamaat YouTube page, so do feel free to watch it again, share and get some of these really important messages out, which can have a huge impact on our health. So thank you once again to all the viewers. Thank you very much, Andy and Sister Farzana. To all of you, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.